So we'll be talking about the research paper writing process. So let's begin. So what do you do when you start your research process? You need a topic, right? So there are a few things that you can take note of when you're selecting a topic. So these are the four things that I feel are highly relevant. So first is be curious. So you need to choose a topic that you are passionate about and that you want to learn about, right? Because there's no use, doing research in an area that doesn't mean anything to you. It's always best and it also serves your research interest best if you choose a topic that you really like, right? Then comes being specific. So what does this mean? So be specific means don't just choose a broad domain or a very vague topic, right? Because there are, n number of blogs or news articles that are vague. The point of a research paper is that it is specific. It provides some, niche domain, some niche result, some niche topic, and something that you can hold on to properly because vague articles can be written by anyone and everyone. You don't need to do research for that, right? So there's that. So you got to be specific. Then comes be relevant. So relevance means what? It has to be relevant to the field of your study and something that you can make a contribution to. You don't want to, build on something that cannot be built on, right? That doesn't make sense. So you want your research to have an impact and you want to do something that hasn't really been done, which brings me to the next point, which is being original. So choosing a topic that is original, that hasn't been covered before, will make your research stand out and it will be more valuable. So if you're just doing something that someone else has done already, then it doesn't serve a purpose, right? So in this day and age, if someone comes to you and says that they reinvented the wheel, what's the point of that? You want to do something that people haven't thought of in the past. So that's where the point of being original comes. So then the next step is to conduct your preliminary research. So preliminary means what? This is not an in-depth process right now, but you get started with something. You choose a topic, you narrow down the area of your research interest, and you just get started with it, right? So how you can do this is by reading lots and lots of papers. So if you don't know how you can effectively read a research paper, I spoke about that in my orientation. I will share the link on the group again, and if you're watching this on YouTube, the link will be in the description. So basically, what you do is you look at these academic journals, books, and reputable websites, and you gather information, familiarize yourself with the topic, and see, what are some of the gaps that are there in the research that is already done, and how you can fill those gaps, or how you can build on the existing methodology, how you can maybe improve the performance of something that has already been done, right? So this is how you get started with papers. There's a lot of reading to be done. After you read, you have to dig deeper. This is where you sort of get a little more in depth and start to look at academic databases, right? So I gave an example in my orientation session of archive. Archive is it's spelled ARXIV. So basically, it's a sort of a preprint journal, not exactly a journal because there's no peer reviewing, but people who write these papers, before they submit it for peer reviewing, they upload it to archive. And that's where you can find, tons and tons of papers and good quality papers. So what you can do is access archive, or if you have any subscription to, let's say, IEEE or CVPR or ACL anthology or any journal that that publishes papers in the area of your interest. You can just look up the papers. You need not look up the journals per se, but you can look up the papers that you want to conduct research and that you feel can contribute to your work, and you can sort of gain insights from them, see what those papers are talking about, what methodology they have used, what approach they have used, and you can use that to support your thesis, your paper, right? And then comes the point of staying organized while conducting your preliminary research. So this is not really a requirement, but it's very helpful if you can stay organized because it ensures that you don't lose track of what you're working on. And let's say you get some idea that you may forget later. It's better to use note-taking apps and all that to just sort of note down your idea. Maybe it will be useful, maybe it won't be useful, but by noting it down, you ensure that you're not losing out on anything. Okay. And of course, you want to cite your sources. So this will come to later in the end. So that's the process of preliminary research. So this is basically like surveying. So you know how in papers usually there's a literature review section. Majority of your literature review content will come from your preliminary research, because this is where you're learning more about what you want to do, not exactly starting off on the research work itself, not exactly improvising yet, but you're learning more about it. You're learning what are the gaps in the domain that you're working on, what can be newly introduced. That's what you're doing here. Then comes formulating a thesis statement. Okay, so now you've read up about what you want to do, you've identified the gaps in the existing research, or you've come up with some sort of at least a basic idea of what you want to do differently, right? So this is where you formulate a thesis statement. Now, a thesis statement basically means what is the point of your research? What is the one core factor or one core statement of your research? Um, it can also be called as a problem statement, right? So basically, what is your research about? That is the thesis statement. Traditionally, I know a thesis means a sort of a document that you write for your academic purposes, but it can also be used in this sense. So there are three things that you need to take care of while formulating a thesis statement. So one is be clear, be specific, and be engaging. So be clear means what? Your thesis statement should be concise, meaning you shouldn't use filler words or just intentionally trying to make the sentence longer. Maybe to sound more technical. That's not the idea. It should be clear. So people who read the thesis statement should get, okay, this is the one sentence that I can clearly understand what the research paper is about. And then it should be easy to understand and recognize throughout your paper. So basically, throughout your research paper, there'll be a lot of technical words, right? So it's a very technically heavy to understand. The thesis statement is one statement that should be preferably technically light, not technically absent, but light enough that the person reading should immediately understand, okay, this is what he's talking about or she is talking about, right? And then be specific. So as I mentioned in the first slide, you don't want to be very vague over here. It should be specific. Identify a domain, identify a subdomain. In that subdomain, what is the problem statement or thesis statement you're working on? And be specific, stick to that. This statement should guide the direction of your purpose of your paper. And finally, be engaging. So this is a little subjective. So be engaging doesn't, you're not really writing a story, right? So it's not, I'm not saying make it entertaining. That's not the idea. But how can you make something engaging? Basically, you're conveying information that is relevant, that is a real problem. You shouldn't be sort of inventing problems just so that you can solve it later. Right? I know there are a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of industries these days who are creating a problem just so that they can sell the solution. So this is not the idea here. You're identifying a real problem and something that can captivate the people reading the paper. Then comes creating an outline. So this is a very useful step. So broadly speaking, a paper can be broken down into the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Now the body has its own subcomponents, right? There's a literature review, there's a method section, experimentation, results, etc., etc. But broadly speaking, there's an introduction, body, and conclusion. So the introduction should be engaging and it should provide a context of the topic and a background also of the topic. Your thesis statement and your explanation of the purpose should be included in your introduction. So just by reading your introduction to the paper, people should not only get, okay, this is what you're talking about, but also what you plan on doing, what has already been done, in simple words, because you will cover them in detail later in the literature review section and in the method section. But in like it's sort of like a trailer for a movie, what you're doing, right? Then comes the body. So in the body, there are sections and subsections, as I mentioned. So each section and each subsection, you can use this to sort of provide your arguments, what you have worked on, and you can, this is where you get really, really specific. Now, introduction is over. You've provided a context, you've provided an overview. The body is where you get to the real core of what you're doing, and this is where you use your the appropriate technical terminology. You don't want to burden the reader with technical words, but in the end, you do want to be very, very precise and very, very specific about what you're saying. So this is a section that usually people, when they're reading papers, they get off put by, because they say, "Oh my God, so many technical words, I'm not understanding anything." This is where you have to take your time, and this by both while reading and while writing, because this is the core of your paper. This is the backbone of your paper. Then comes the conclusion. So the conclusion and the introduction both are very related to each other. They're sort of interlinked, because what you're saying you will do in your introduction, in the conclusion you're saying, okay, this is what I said I will do, this is what I have done. That's the point of the conclusion. So most people, when they start out reading a research paper, they don't read it in one sitting, because as I mentioned, it's very technically heavy and it takes time. So let's say they take 5 to 6 sittings or maybe more sittings to read one paper. At the end, they want to sort of have some takeaway, right? And that's what your conclusion will provide. They say, okay, I read a 5 page paper or 6 page paper, but in the end, if they don't have some sort of lasting statement that they can remember, it doesn't have the same impact, and that impact will be provided by a conclusion. So this will contain all the summary of the main points that you presented in your paper. You will restate your thesis statement or problem statement here, and the implications of your finding, meaning what is the utility, what is the purpose of your finding. And then comes offering recommendations for future research. So every research is actually limited, right? You can't provide something that is perfect. So it is important that you address it. Say that, okay, this is where my research took me. This is what can be done in the future. This is what I was not able to achieve maybe in the given time frame, or I didn't have the resources to do it. But this is what can be improved on. And you can mention that in your conclusion. Now you conduct your in-depth research. So why did I say that you can write introduction, body, conclusion before conducting an in-depth research? So this is not this is a personal preference, that if you write the basic sort of a backbone, or a not really a backbone, like a skeleton of what you're trying to accomplish, then as you conduct your in-depth research, you can sort of add in more and more points. So it's sort of like you're laying the mold, right? Initially with your outline, you're saying, this is my introduction, this is my literature survey, this is my method, my experimentation results, this is my conclusion. So just some of these sections may be blank initially, like for example, experimentation. Before starting your research, you can't write that part, right? But if you write your introduction first and body first, when you conduct your in-depth research, you can modify those, you can improve on those. And then you will see a big difference in terms of, okay, when I started out this project, I thought I will accomplish, something in a particular way. Now I've done it in a much better way, simply because you had that skeleton, you had that mold ready. And that really helps you organize your thoughts a lot better. So when you're conducting your in-depth research, you have to focus, you have to analyze, and you have to preferably take notes. So focusing means what? Conduct your comprehensive research. Again, you have to go back to reading. There's a lot of reading to do. That I can't state that enough, because that's the core of what you'll be doing. Take notes, note down the sources of the information that you're getting. You'll see why that will come in the end. And while you're doing that, also analyze the papers, analyze every paragraph, every sentence, every word. If you don't know what it means, go look it up, learn about it, and really sort of crank your heads in this part of the process. And of course, take notes preferably. As I mentioned, it helps you keep your thoughts organized. It helps you note down ideas before you forget them. It helps you, sort of strategize what approach you can take, what approach has been taken, what approach you feel is novel, and or what approach you feel can overperform the existing approaches, right? That's where note taking will really, really be of help to you. And then, of course, analyze and organize the information. So just elaborating on the previous point, analyzing in the sense you can sort of create categories. So as I mentioned in the outline, you have your categories, right? So when you're reading, you want, let's say, one section, you come across some paragraph in a paper, and you say, okay, this will be helpful for my literature review. This will be helpful for my the method that I'm using if I want to explain it better. You can sort of categorize what you read, and you can sort of interlink or connect these ideas or connect these sections in your paper. And of course, you can evaluate the quality and the relevance of your sources. So you don't want to cite something that is wrong, right? Something that is providing false information. You don't want that to be the source of your research. So for that, please ensure that whatever sources you are referring to, they're all reputable sources, and they are sort of preferably in a peer-reviewed journal, because that ensures the quality. So now, when you start writing the paper properly, you can either start off with the introduction, or you can write the introduction in the end. My personal preference is to write the introduction in the end. I will tell you why. But before that, so let's look at what comes in an introduction. So you have the context and the background of your work. So context means what? What is the domain? What is the problem statement? What is the solution that you are offering? That is the background. Then your thesis statement, of course. May again make it clear, concise. Readers will know what to expect from your paper. And of course, make it engaging. Maybe some quotes you can use. This is not really overused, because in usually in engineering or STEM fields, we don't really use quotes that much. But if you want to use one or two, you can do that, just to keep it more engaging and so that readers will want to keep reading. Um, and then you can move on to the body. So present your evidence and arguments. Again, please elaborate in as much detail as you can in the body section, because this is the core of your work. This is what people will really look onto and grab onto if they want to improve on your work. Then you can use transitions. So transition words sort of ensure that your paragraphs don't seem like separate entities. Um, this is a very simple trick, but it's pretty effective. So transition words can be something like, however, on the other hand, things like that, things that sort of link one statement or one paragraph to another, so that people know that they're not reading two different things. It's the same thing, and everything is, organized in a smooth structure. And of course, balance perspectives. Consider alternate perspectives and conflicting research findings, because in the end, you don't want your paper to have a bias. It's not like you're presenting just one point of view, because then it becomes almost like a religion, right? And this is not a religion. This is not one belief that you have. This is hardcore science, and this is facts. This can be measured. And when something can be measured, there are bound to be conflicts. So you want to also cite sources that are contradictory to your view, to your research, and acknowledge that my research has certain limitations, but this is what I have done. This is the approach that I felt was suitable. It may have its limitations, but here is why I feel differently. And you then that's where you can really elaborate. Now, of course, when I say all this, I'm not asking you to write those words exactly. So you can't say I feel this way, I feel that way. That's not right to write in a research paper, but you get the point of what I'm saying, right? So you want other contradictory and conflicting research findings to also be showcased, so that people get an idea that you've done your work, you have done your reading, and you know what you're talking about, you know the limitations, and still you're proposing something, and that holds value. Then you can cite sources and use your evidence. So before that, let me tell you why I prefer to personally write the introduction at the end. So I prefer to write the introduction after writing the body. So this is because when you initially write your introduction, since it's the first thing that you write in a paper, of course after the abstract, but still in terms of the core content, introduction is the first thing that you write. You don't really have a bird's eye perspective or bird's eye view of what the entire work is, even though you have covered the work, even though you have finished your research. I feel that once you have written your methods, once you have written your literature survey, once you have written your results and conclusion, then you can really touch on some key points that you may have otherwise missed out. So that helps you sort of strengthen the content of your introduction, such that people at the end are, that introduction serves as a sort of a huge punch, not in a violent sense, but it is a sort of a very strong part of your paper. Because usually if the introduction is weak, then people don't move on to the research and other core sections, because they say, okay, if the introduction is like this, then why bother reading everything else? So that part has to be really, really solid. So this is why I prefer to write introduction in the end. Now, of course, you have to cite your sources and use evidence. You don't want to engage in he said, she said kind of business. All your sources have to be, preferably reputable, but they have to be credible sources. And for this, what we do is citing is done in the form of, there are different methods, but it's called a citation. So there's an APA format, MLA format, Chicago citation, etc. So it's basically different ways of saying this is the paper that I read, or this is the journal that I read, and this is the website that I referred to, and you sort of provide all the links of that in your references and citation section. And this section usually comes at the very end, and it's a very important section. You may not understand why, because who cares where I got my information from, right? Wrong, because it is important where you get your information from. People want to know if it's credible, and also if people want to refer to the source content, then they should have that option. Let's say you built on something. If I want to uh, read the original content for myself, if I want to build on that original content, I should have that option, right? That's the purpose of citation. And of course, there's also the idea that you are giving credit where credit is due. That is, you're not just taking information from someone and saying that you came up with it. You are giving the appropriate credit to people who have worked on it, and you're saying this, part of my paper, this idea I got from these people. Um, and that sort of is an ethical and the morally right thing to do, that you give credit to the people who have actually strived to come up with that idea, or who have actually put in the work. And then you sort of integrate evidence from the papers that you've read, articles that you've read, so that there's some solid basis to what you are saying. And of course, the most important part of this is please avoid plagiarism. Don't copy, someone just copy paste into your paper. It's highly unethical. It's not going to serve you. It's not going to serve the people who worked on the paper. And of course, it's not going to serve the readers because it's just a repetition. So please always cite your sources. If you want to take a particular idea from someone, paraphrase it. Paraphrasing meaning just say it in different words. But if even if you are doing that, say that you got the idea from the relevant sources. So always cite your sources. Don't plagiarize. And plagiarism is also something that may happen unintentionally sometimes. Maybe you write something that has already been written, but you weren't intending to plagiarize. Which is why in the end, after you write your paper, always conduct a plagiarism check. Every journal has a percentage specified. Usually it's around 15%. If the plagiarism is greater than 15%, usually your paper gets rejected. So always check your plagiarism unintentionally also. You may have done it. Nothing, no harm in that, but check it and alter it accordingly so that your paper doesn't get rejected for no reason. Then comes writing the conclusion. Again, you can do this after the introduction or before the introduction. It's up to you. So in the conclusion, again, this is another core, punch of your paper along with the introduction. So here is where you summarize the main points, restate the thesis statement, and offer any recommendations or future enhancements. So as I said, people read papers in multiple sittings, and at the end, you want them to be left with a clear idea of what you spoke. It shouldn't be that you specified a long detail of the methods you took, and at the end people forgot, okay, this is the method you took, but what was the paper about overall, right? And that's what the conclusion provides. It's a sort of a recap for the reader as well. And it sort of reiterates your point and strengthens the idea that you are proposing. And again, as I said, mention the future enhancements as well. Don't be afraid to mention that because you may consider it as a negative point, but it's not really. There is no negative point in research. It's all about learning. It's all about advancing human knowledge, and human knowledge will always be limited. At least by addressing the limitation, you have the possibility to overcome it. So when you address that this is where I fell short, maybe someone else can build on it, maybe you can build on it in the future. Now, of course, after you write the entire paper, this is a sort of a little more non-technical part. This is just from the pure paper writing perspective. Revise your paper and make edits, right? So this it's preferable if you can get a professor or a friend to help you out, because preferably actually a professor because they'll know what area that you're working on. If you have a guide for your research, that will be cool as well. So read your paper critically and identify areas that you can improve. So this can also, sometimes you think your research is done and you write the paper and you think, hang on, I can improve on this section. I can make it better. I can do some more research. You can do that when you're revising. And then you sort of pay attention to the way you have written. So the coherence, the clarity, the logic. So are you conveying your findings efficiently? Because if you have found something really valuable, if you're not able to explain it to people, then there's no real value in that, right? It's like sort of having a diamond buried 100 feet below the ground. There's no real purpose of that. You want it to be accessible to people. You want people to be able to understand it. So ensure that whatever you have written, it is understandable and people are able to get what you're trying to communicate. So the logic should be clear and there should be clarity and coherence in your paper. Then edit carefully. So this is so you can actually you can call it nitpicking, but it's not. It's actually important. It shows that you're credible. So editing for grammar, spelling mistakes, typos, punctuation errors. If you're not very sure about these, then you have tools that can do it for you these days. You have your Grammarly or you have your GPTs and all that. They can sort of review all your grammar, spellings, and all that. Even MS Word does this to some extent. Um, but please ensure that there are no grammar mistakes, because sometimes when readers are reading a paper, if there's some spelling mistake or too many spelling mistakes or typos and all that, it's off-putting. And it not only shows that you didn't put enough effort into the paper, it also shows that maybe what you're talking about is not really that valuable. Even though it is, it may come across that way, and you don't want that. And of course, there are some formatting, points to be taken care of. Formatting is usually different for each journal that you want to publish to. IEEE has its own format, Springer has its own format. They will mention that usually. IEEE, for example, on Overleaf, Overleaf is a website where you can sort of format your paper. On there, they have their own template. IEEE conference template is there. So you can use that and make sure that you follow all the points, because it's very, very important that your paper follows that format. Each one, if they follow a different format, then it becomes very hard to read, right? So that's why these journals specify a particular format that they want the paper in. So please ensure that you take care of that. Then comes getting feedback. So this feedback you can obtain from your professor, or a guide, or any friends that you know who are knowledgeable in the area of expertise, or even your research group itself. Let's say you're doing research with 3 to 4 other people. You can just have a sort of a review session with them, and whatever suggestions, whatever comments, you can incorporate that into your final draft. This is also very useful because it ensures that nothing is missing. Something that you couldn't see, someone else can see, somebody else can spot it out. So make sure you get good feedback. Okay, so that was it for the research paper writing process. I hope this session was informative for you guys. I hope I could provide you with a sort of a brief idea of how you can go about writing your papers, how you can go about conducting your research. Thank you, and I will see you in the future webinars.